epidemiologist at the University of Ottawa. He joins us now on 680 CJOB. With the variants out there, with the fact that we've been through this before, this is probably wise on behalf of the Manitoba government, is it not, Ray White?
It is. We really have to hold steady and prevent ourselves from having unnecessary exposures lest we trigger this third wave more than we need to. It's a delicate precision right now, and I don't think people fully understand how dire the situation is. It's explosive.
And I think it's frustrating for people to understand why the rules are different in different provinces, particularly when we're told, if you take Alberta as an example, that they have more cases of the variant there, and yet, we have the head of Landmark Cinemas on saying, listen, they're able to open in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Ontario, and yet movie theaters are closed here. So try and square that circle for people, because I think that's the hardest thing when you see your friends and neighbors in other provinces able to do things you can't.
So half of this is science and half of this is politics, unfortunately. And around the table of a decision maker, you have not just epidemiologists and public health people, you have people speaking on behalf of the capacity of the hospital system. You have people speaking on behalf of the mental health of the citizens and for the various economic sectors that are being affected by this. So I understand these decisions aren't made with just a public health perspective in mind. And as a result of the multifaceted voices around the table, different tables will render different decisions, unfortunately. So, speaking scientifically, a lot of this has to do with the speed at which the transmission is happening, the amount of new variants that are present, and how much capacity you have in your system to absorb new cases. And different provinces have different capacity.
So scientifically speaking, then, when you look at what Manitoba is doing compared to other provinces, you sit in Ontario. Um, are we more conservative than most other provinces when it comes to the reopening of our society and economy?
In some ways, you're not. So different provinces have different approaches towards school openings, for example, different rates of opening of patios and restaurants and bars. I think Manitoba opened some things earlier than Ontario, but it's closing some things earlier than Ontario as well. It's a bit of a it's a smorgasbord out there, and it's hard for me to compare directly which ones are more liberal than others. But every province must make a decision that's best for its population, keeping in mind that population densities are different as well. The distance from borders is different. The amount of incoming traffic via your airport is different. The rate at which new variants are spreading is different. So it makes sense to have this regional approach.
Yeah, and certainly when it comes to variants, we don't have those international linkages at our airport that you do in Ontario, Toronto specifically. What's the situation closer to where you're at in Ottawa and Toronto when it comes to variants?
It's a little dire here right now. B117, the UK variant, now accounts for anywhere between 40 and 60% of new cases. And we don't really know because there is a delay, there is a lag in establishing exactly which cases are new variants. And that's because we have two methods of determining a new variant. One is rapid and one is slower. The rapid one is a hand waving argument by examining which aspects of the PCR test have failed. And the longer, slower test involves actual genomic surveillance. So, given that reality, any data you see is already a week or even longer old. So, as a result, things are worse than we think. But to answer your question, we're probably close to half of new cases are new variants. It doesn't look like the South African and Brazilian variants, B1351 and P1, are as dire as B117, which is good, but B117 is scary enough. So that's a reason to be sober about all this.
When you're looking at the research, do we know yet if people who are vaccinated, either with one shot or two, are still carriers, maybe asymptomatically, of the virus?
Good question. So AstraZeneca, during its first clinical trial, was able to determine that its vaccine can diminish transmission by up to 67%. There is some new data suggesting that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines may diminish transmission as much as 80%, meaning that even prevents asymptomatic transmission that much. That's good. It's not perfect though. As a result, while transmission is high, by which I mean while the community caseloads are high, even vaccinated people have a probability of passing it on to other people, which is why we recommend that even those who've been vaccinated wear a mask and keep their distance at least until the crisis is over, until the population incidence rate drops low enough that the probability of moving infection around comes down to near zero. So this is not interminable. It just means that everyone's got to wear a mask for the next couple of months at least, until the cases come down significantly.
What's the big unanswered question in your mind right now?
Oh boy, there's a couple of them. The transmission one is a real one still. I mentioned some stats, but we don't know exactly how much it is diminished. And the second is how long immunity lasts from these vaccines. It may just be a year, maybe 2 years, it may be 5 years, we don't know. And of course, we don't know the rate at which the new variants are arriving and which ones will be vaccine escape. One of that nature will arise at some point, by which I mean a variant that is immune to our current vaccines. So we have to be sure to vaccinate ahead of that eventuality. So those are the unknowns that concern me.
When we look at AstraZeneca, we saw the data out of the United States phase 3 clinical trial saying that the efficacy was about 79% overall, 100% effective at preventing hospitalization and death. So that certainly sounds good. Also saying that there were no safety concerns. What are Canadian officials saying about the AZ vaccine today, particularly around blood?
First of all, those are inspiring numbers, but they're a little problematic. First of all, the sample sizes weren't really large enough to be confident around that 100% reduction in severe case and hospitalization. It's somewhere between 95 and 100, which is pretty high. Second is that there's some controversy right now because AstraZeneca reported only the interim data, not the most recent data. So the actual efficacy score is somewhere between 65 and 74%. Probably isn't 79%. Even so, that's pretty high. And when it comes to safety, they found no serious safety issues. But these rare blood clots, which are exceedingly rare, happen in 1 in a million. The sample sizes for the clinical trial is like 30,000. That's not enough people to get a blood clot. So it's not going to find one. So if you're concerned about blood clots, keep in mind you have a much higher chance of getting one from COVID itself. And so we're well advised to avoid getting COVID, and the best way to avoid getting COVID is to get a vaccine. So it's still unclear whether the vaccine is causing these extremely rare blood clotting events. But even if it is, as I mentioned, they're exceedingly rare. So if you are concerned about these things, I understand, but I still think the benefits far outweigh the risks.
That's what the experts are saying. They're saying they know how to treat it as well if it happens to you. Always appreciate your time and your insight. Raywan Dianan is an epidemiologist at the University of Ottawa. Just adjusting the rules for retail.
Well, that went well.